Hi, welcome back to the Craft Beer Runner. Today we're doing something a little bit different. We have my friend Leah on. We're going to talk about climate and climate change. Leah has been working in the green industries in consulting mostly since she got her master's degree in environmental sciences or environmental policy, correct? Environmental policy. Okay, and you worked for the Tennessee Valley Authority originally, and before moving out to Seattle, that's where I met you in Seattle. And since you've been here, you've worked for Built Green, which is a lobbying or a industry. How would you describe it?
Yeah, it's an industry association, but it was a green home certification program.
Okay, great. And then currently you work for Climate Solutions, which is an Oregon and Washington organization, and you're currently doing Washington transportation policy, is that correct?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
So I wanted to bring Leah on today. She's super knowledgeable and she's super involved, and just want to kind of let her talk. But before we get started, Leah, what are you drinking today?
Well, I'm going to drink, I really like cider. I like beer, but I like cider too. So I have this Reverend Nat cider that I got from Hill City Tap House, and Saint Citron is what it's called. Yeah, I quite like it. I think it's really nice. They are out of Portland. Yeah, they have a lot of really unique cider flavors. So I quite enjoy trying their different stuff when I see it.
Right, and I'm drinking one of our local breweries doing something a little bit different today. So this is the can. It's from a company called Timber City. It's a hard ginger beer. It's with blueberries. They're based in the South Park neighborhood of Seattle, pretty close to West Seattle. For this real quick.
Oh,
I also have my Hill City glass as well.
Nice. Represent. I'm not classy and I'm drinking out of the can, so.
Oh, no worries.
Save a dish.
So cheers. Thanks
cheers.
For coming on.
Yeah.
This is going to be a fun conversation. So first, what got you into environmental policy? Why did you want to pursue your master's degree in that?
Yeah, it's something that as a kid, I've always been really interested in, though in sort of different shades. When I was a child, early on, climate wasn't really a conversation, right? But I really was into, save the animals and what I think a lot of children are into, but that sort of ethos just stuck with me. And I grew up in Kentucky, and actually when I was young, I saw strip mining happening. And it's a very shocking visual. And you literally just see machinery tearing up the earth and hurting people. Folks who live in these areas often don't have potable water. When kids take baths, they have to close their eyes really tight so the water doesn't get in their eyes because it's very acidic. It's obviously highly polluting, and I think that sort of just stuck with me. So throughout college, I took a lot of different environmental science, environmental policy classes. Climate was then becoming a conversation. An Inconvenient Truth came out my first year in college. And so, of course, that really brought climate more onto the national conversation. And it's something that, I think a lot of my passions for human rights, honestly, really intersect with environmental policy and with climate. There's environmental justice and climate justice are hugely important issues. And I think I'm also a pretty holistic thinker and just naturally like to sort of tie things together. And I think climate change is a issue that really does that. We need to fix climate change in order to help fix a lot of other disparities and vice versa. And so I think it's just something that sort of suited me and I felt really passionate about. And so after college, I went straight into my master's program in environmental policy just because I knew that's what I wanted to do. And I'm really glad I did, because I'm super thankful that right now I'm able to, earn my living advocating for climate policies in Washington State. It's super. So.
Right, and so, like I said, you did your master's degree, you went to Tennessee Valley Authority, and then came out to Washington, worked in the housing industry on the green side, and now you're working on the transportation policy so do you want to talk a little bit about what you do for Climate Solutions? What exactly does it mean that you're the Washington transportation manager? What's that mean?
Yeah. So at Climate Solutions, I'm on the policy team, which means I help research policy, write policy, advocate and lobby for policy in Olympia at the state legislature, and also some different local governments really work on trying to implement policies at the intersection of climate and transportation. So, in addition to that, I do some research on, for example, we just released a report on pathways to decarbonize our transportation sector. What is it going to take in terms of electrifying our vehicle fleet and also reducing vehicle miles traveled and getting more people to take transit or walk or bike to get around? And what of those things in combination will get us to our goals of carbon reductions by 2050? So it really runs the gamut, but I would say the core of my job is policy advocacy and really trying to create coalitions that will get us wins in Olympia and get policies passed.
Right. So I think the conversation around transportation, at least on the green side, it's kind of twofold because you have the urban conversation, like people that live in cities, and then you also have the suburban and rural conversation because you do have a lot of people that don't necessarily have access to transportation based on affordability because they can't afford to live in cities, but that's where the jobs are and they live further outside. Do you want to talk a little bit on the suburban and rural side, what people can do, and also like what kind of policies should we be focusing on to really reduce our carbon footprint?
Yeah. So there's a whole layer of issues involved here. Like you said, the cost issue. It's really expensive to live in a city and to live in Seattle. And we've even seen the suburbanization of poverty, where folks who used to live in the urban core because of prices have been pushed further and further out, and then are forced in the areas where there's no transit or no good transit that works for them, and then they are forced to drive. I grew up in a rural area, by the way, like where I grew up, transit score 0, walk score 0. I grew up on a long, windy country road, no sidewalk, nothing, right? And so I do think it's important to develop policies that increase the amount of housing in cities. So more folks can live in cities, so it's more affordable, and more people are going to be in areas where they will have access to transit or where they can walk or bike to get around. And I think having safe infrastructure for folks to walk and bike is important. But that said, our land use policies for the past 70 years have really incentivized sprawl, and we're just in a situation where right now a lot of folks don't live where they can access transit, which is a problem for the environment and also for folks who, for some reason or another, are unable to drive. Right. So that said, I think as I was talking about our research earlier, I'm really, in terms of climate, we are facing such an emergency. We need to reduce our emissions so quickly that I think we really need to use every tool in the toolbox. And so given our current sort of land use situation, I think it's really important to, yes, we need to electrify all of the vehicles that are on the road, but also, especially where it makes sense in urban and suburban areas, really boost our transit system and make it easier for people not to have to drive in the first place. But we need to use both strategies, right? Because within 10 years, we're not going to have everybody living in an urban environment where there's access to transit. That's just not how our land use policies are designed over time. So I think pursuing both of those strategies is super important. And one other thing I wanted to flag is that comes down at a policy level. I think the transportation sector is one area that really shows how we cannot rely on individual choice to solve the climate crisis, because our individual choices are so constrained by the system. We really need to change the system in order to help solve this crisis. Like if you live in a rural area and you have no choice but to drive around to get around, which is how I grew up, you might not have the money to purchase an electric vehicle right now, or if you do, maybe you have to drive longer distances and you can't count on having a reliable charger at your workplace, right? There's all these different factors that sort of play into it, where people are making choices under, a very constrained system. And so we want to change that system and make it easy for folks in rural areas to very easily afford electric vehicles, to very easily be able to charge them no matter what kind of trips that they're taking. And then in urban areas, obviously, make it very easy to opt for transit or feel safe biking, just getting around. So providing those sustainable systems, I think, is really key. And it takes policy to do that.
For me, for the past year, I actually relied heavily on public transit. I sold my car. We still have one car in the family, but I sold my car, and I was working downtown, and at least before the West Seattle Bridge went out, it was super simple to commute
Mhm.
to from where I lived to downtown Seattle, whether by boat, by bus, and actually by foot too.
Mhm.
I did run commutes. I'd either run 5 miles in the morning or 5 miles in the afternoon and knock my run out, plus be able to commute. The water taxi is such a fun. It's
Yeah.
after a stressful day at work. There's nothing like jumping on a boat for 15 minutes. It's actually really relaxing.
Totally. The water taxi is
Yeah,
super. I love it. Yeah. Yeah.
yeah. But we're actually here, so in West Seattle, we're in this really conundrum because,
Yeah.
as you said, the funding is going down because revenues for the city have gone down, and ridership's gone down because a lot of people still aren't working in the office because of COVID, but also some people don't feel safe in public transportation. People feel safer in their personal vehicle right now
Yep.
because they don't want to be around other people in a closed, confined space that they can't control. But our bridge went down, and so with cut-in routes and increase in traffic for people to go around, you know, they've got, it's kind of opposite effects. Like we need to solve. I know they want to throw $100 million at fixing the bridge here in West Seattle, but the solution, I don't think, is doing that. The solution is getting more people on public transit to reduce their times in the commute, and find a way around that. Now let's get into the cities themselves. Uh, you know, what can be done in the short term? Like, what can people do that that's not policy wise? I mean, I know you're saying there's a lot of things that are policy based, and a lot of the
Mhm.
decisions we can't control because of policy. But like, what can people living in the city do?
Yeah. So, I mean, there's a few things, and I would sort of say, people can help shape the system through advocacy, right? And so I think that's a really important thing. Like, if you are, for example, like if you want to bike around, but you're afraid to, like, there's a point of advocacy for you. You can talk to your local government and be like, look, there's not safe bike infrastructure near me. This something needs to be fixed. In Seattle right now, I should plug, coming up on the ballot in November is a transit measure to help fund transit. It's renewing a measure that we have already had. So if we don't renew the measure, we're going to see big cuts to our bus service. So absolutely vote yes on transit on the Seattle ballot. And it's going to be way down toward the bottom. So don't stop voting, go through the whole ballot.
And I think it's also important just about why elections matter in general, and it's not just
Yep.
the federal election. Why every election, including small elections, matter because in many states these propositions, the direct democracy is on every ballot, whether it's an April ballot with three things on it, like someone you've never even heard of, and then two propositions, including maybe like funding the fire department. And there'll be stuff on here that can affect, bikes, transportation,
Yeah.
or health in general. And so, for me, I think I've maybe missed three total elections in my 22 years of voting, and they're all minor elections. But I grew up in a family where voting was super important, and so like I've made a point in my life to always um, submit a ballot.
Yeah. I mean, it's having done some work at the local level as well through my current job and also just in sort of general advocacy. I'm on the local Sierra Club group in Seattle, and we do a lot of advocacy around sort of urban policy, urbanism, urban transportation, affordable housing in the city, and who your local electeds are is super important. That makes a really big difference. So even voting in the primary, like don't forget that. Look up who the candidates are and who better represents your values. So I would encourage everybody, to view advocacy as a climate action for starters, but also in your personal life, yeah, consider trying to walk a little bit more. Consider trying to bike if you have safe enough infrastructure near you. I know for some folks that's scary, and I totally get it. Try to take transit more if you're able to, and sort of build a schedule around that. I think you know just trying to do what you can, but also not putting too much pressure on yourself when it's too hard. I also think that's important. I think a lot of people get really wrapped up in things, and so that's why I think advocacy is such an important outlet, because when it is hard, right, you need to change the system. But yeah, and sort of on individual actions, there's a lot of other things like I think talking to your friends is another huge thing, right? Elevating the issue so other folks are also being ready to advocate. So yeah, I always come back to advocacy because again, I think that's such a crucial thing. Like me reducing my personal carbon footprint is such a drop in the bucket. But if we have somebody who's elected president or, you know, elected to the Senate, who's a climate champion, like that can make a massive difference. So it's really important to get involved in politics in my opinion. Yeah.
One of my favorite tools that is kind of an obvious thing, and some people might not know what you can do with it, is Google Maps. Because on Google Maps, not only can you, when you type in two addresses, it gives you the driving directions, but there's also a pedestrian option. It gives you multiple pedestrian routes. And in many cities, it has a public transit option that also it's not necessarily in every city, but I know like in Seattle it is, it has time maps. It actually, so if you type in, you know, where you want to go and you can plan it in advance too, it will tell you, you know, what time the bus is going to show up. It's not just take this bus, it is buses will show up this way. And, you know, and I think that's an awesome tool that people can use to help reduce the unknown of public transportation for someone that hasn't really taken it much.
Yeah. Yeah. So, and I will say, you know, like I mentioned, when I grew up in a rural area and there wasn't buses, right? I never took the bus. And it wasn't really until I moved out to Seattle that I started regularly taking the bus. And so I appreciated your point about Google Maps. And I would just encourage folks, you know, at first, the bus system, if you've never used it, can seem a little bit overwhelming, but maybe ask a friend to map it out with you one time and give it a try. Once you've got it, it's really easy. And I would say for me, you know, I think about the bus as a way to get my time back. If I'm commuting, I used to have a pretty long commute. Either way, it was long if I was taking the bus, it was long if I was driving. And at least when I was on the bus, guess what? I can sit back, I can read, I can play on my phone, I can listen to music, whatever it is, right? If I'm in the car, I would arrive so stressed out because of this horrible drive and this horrible congestion, and I could not do anything else, right? I had to concentrate on the road. And so I would encourage folks to think about their time and how they want to spend their time. And, you know, I've always, whether I've, you know, taken transit to work, like I just find myself in a better mood when I get there because I'm able to do something that I enjoy, like reading. I got through a lot more books when I was, you know, commuting into the office. So, you know, I would encourage people to think about that. And, you know, also I've one fun story I should tell is, you know, buses can really bring folks together, or just public transit in general. And so when I moved out to Seattle, I was riding the bus home from work one day and I saw this woman who looked super familiar to me, and it took a sec to place her. And I had studied abroad with her almost a decade prior in Russia, and she was on the same bus as me. And so I went up to her, I was like, Allie? And it took her a second, and then she recognized me. And, you know, I didn't realize that she lived in Seattle now, and because she is not originally from here and I'm not either. And yeah, we literally had this chance meeting on a bus and we connected, and ever since, like, we've been hanging out, we're doing Russian lessons together. So like we really rekindled a friendship. And so, you know, I just want to sort of throw out there that, you know, when you're by yourself in a car, you're kind of isolating yourself, and you sort of close off the opportunity that you would have to, you know, have these different sort of chance happenings. So I would sort of posit that as well. And, you know, I do want to highlight that, you know, as a woman, for me, it can be a little bit uncomfortable sometimes on public transportation, but it's not any different than any other public space. It's certainly not different than when I'm in a parking garage, right? And so that's an unfortunate reality. And if folks feel uncomfortable, like, I think there's a lot of ways to sort of help with that, like sit near the driver and things like that. I've had really great drivers. Like, bus drivers tend to be really super people, I will say. So, you know, I know a lot of women can be sort of intimidated by that factor, but there are definitely ways to address that if you're nervous. And I don't find it any worse than any other place, unfortunately. So,
At least in major cities, the buses also have cameras and audio recording as well for your safety.
They do.
They also, here in Seattle, there's a phone number you can text if you see something to report it. There are things like that. And yeah, no, I do hear you about your concerns as a woman. Since this is the Craft Beer Runner, it is Thursday happy hour, even though we're recording this on a Saturday night. I do want to end with the questions I typically ask all my friends. So let's start off with, do you remember your first experience with beer?
Yeah, and it wasn't positive. It was my grandpa who loved drinking beer. I really wanted to try it. He gave me a sip. It tasted like rotten apple juice to me. I spat it out, and then he told me, no, you're supposed to savor it. So
my friend Chris, so when this video is posted, it'll be 2 weeks ago, he was talking about how he was given a warm can of Coors Light and it tasted like hot piss. Yeah.
Yeah. It's a taste that you grow into.
Yeah. Good beer is an acquired taste, but it's worth it. I don't know why anyone wants to acquire a taste for drinking bad beer.
That's true. I do not buy that.
Yeah. What about your favorite styles of beer? Do you have a particular style? I know you grew up in the Midwest, where barley wine's a thing. What's your...
Yeah, I do like barley wine. I'm also a big cider girl. I have to admit, I like sweet things, so I do like sweet cider. When it comes to beers, I tend to like darker ones though, but ones that are not. Also, I don't like hoppy beers. That's not my thing. So yeah, give me a nice porter or sometimes like a nice, like an imperial sometimes. I could get imperial stout sometimes. So yeah.
Well, Flying Line, I believe, just released their Imperial Stout, or they're about to. I saw
really
Evan post a can of it. I'm like, I need it. And then locally, so within the state of Washington, do you have a favorite brewery or two?
I do enjoy Flying Lion. It's close to me. They have lots of good dark beer styles that I like. Sometimes they'll also have some really fresh ones that are good. So I really quite enjoy them a lot. There's a ton of good breweries around here. I will say that I've also really enjoyed Perhelian's beer up on Beacon Hill. And
they're also one of the few local breweries that has a full menu.
Yes, they have really good food, and they also make beer tails, like cocktails with their beer, and they're legit good. They're really good. I find that very creative and very tasty. So I'll give them a shout out. I like their beer tails.
Awesome. And then lastly, outside the state of Washington, do you have a favorite brewery or two?
Yeah, well, I am drinking Reverend Nat's hard cider, which is from Portland, and I quite like their cider. So I will say that. I'll go with that. They have really unique flavors and enjoy it.
Awesome. Yeah, thank you so much for your time. It was great having this conversation. It's a lot different than our normal conversations on this channel. I think it's an important conversation to have. Hopefully you all enjoyed a beer or two during this conversation. It was a little long. I hope you stick by. I'll put resources down below in the links. And then please like and subscribe to this channel. And I should have at least one more conversation on climate coming up with another friend of mine in the coming weeks as well. So hope you guys enjoy your day, and cheers. You have your can.
Cheers.